Hey everyone, today I share how I use Lovable.dev, claude.ai, and Cursor to build Santa's AI reindeer quiz for AI builders. This is a fun 7-question quiz that will match your AI builder personality with one of Santa's reindeer. If you're learning how to build web apps with AI coding tools, this video is for you. I go over my entire iteration process in creating this web application from scratch and give some helpful tips along the way. So, let's do this. Welcome to the 12 Days of Codemas, day number 4. So a few days ago, I had this idea of creating a Santa's AI reindeer quiz. You would go through all the questions in the quiz, and at the end, you would be assigned one of Santa's reindeer that matches your AI coding personality. It took me about 2 days to do this. Now, I wasn't working on this for 2 full days. It took one day a few hours in the morning, and yesterday a few hours in the morning as well. But I had a lot of fun creating this. There are some pretty funny inside jokes in there that I know you all will enjoy. I put a lot of thought into the scoring system and having each reindeer have a personality strength. So within the quiz, there are actually clear paths to each reindeer. I'd never created this kind of quiz before. Hope you all enjoy it. So link in the description below. Feel free to share it with your AI builder friends, share it with your communities. And with that said, let us get straight into how I built this. So I built this quiz in a 3-step process. Step 1, mockup design. Step 2, quiz creation. And step 3, development. I did have a step 4 over here, which was a nice to have. And we'll get into that later. Let's start right over here with step number 1, mockup design. To generate the initial mockup of this application, I started in V0. And when I started using these AI tools, V0 was kind of my go-to for UI mockups, but not sure if that is still the choice of designing mockups. And I'll tell you why. So when I went into V0, I tried twice to generate a mockup. Here's what those mockups look like. So the prompt that I gave it was very short. It was maybe 3 or 4 sentences saying I wanted to create an AI reindeer quiz, holiday, festive, bright colors, fun vibes. And this is what V0 gave me. I mean, what are these colors, right? Like, this looks like something from like mid-2000s that you would take. I don't know. It's just not like modern day design vibes. So I started another chat with V0 and here's what it gave me next. Look at this. I mean, come on. This is just so bland and boring. So I said, okay, maybe let's not use V0. Let's go to Lovable, which I do have a couple of videos on Lovable, and they've always done a great job of generating a design, a beautiful design in the first prompt. So although I deleted the Lovable project that I tried to initially create the mockup in, I did have a screenshot, and this is a screenshot of what Lovable generated. So it has this nice like red salmon kind of color to it, a nice card over here that is elevated from the background. You have a progress bar, a highlighted answer once you click or hover over an answer, question 2 of 6. And if you look really closely, it had an effect of stars falling down from the top to the bottom. And I was like, this is beautiful. It only took me 1 prompt to do this in Lovable. After I did this in Lovable, a screenshot of this, and there you go. My mockup was done. I had enough that I needed to give to Cursor. Going back to my diagram, I tried twice for a mockup in V0. I was not happy with it. Tried once in Lovable, and first time was a charm. And there we had my mockup. So after step 1, I moved on to step 2, which was quiz creation with claude.ai. So this step took a good amount of time. I would say I spent at least 1 or 2 hours on this step alone. I started with creating our first version of the questions and answers. I asked Claude to generate an initial set of questions, and from there, during this step and during development, I iterated on refining the questions to be a little more humorous, a little more fun, and to inject inside jokes to us AI coders just to make it a humorous and lighthearted and fun experience. So after creating the first version of questions and answers, I generated quizcontent.ts. After I had that file, then I got into the results and scoring system. So this took a lot of iteration as well. So I actually looked up all of Santa's 9 reindeers' personalities and then merged those personalities with AI building and AI coding traits. So now you can say these reindeers are now AI powered. So we have a few core traits over here. We have speed, precision, community, strategy, social, and versatility. And depending on your answers, we are actually giving weights to each of these traits. And based off the added weights for each of these traits, we assign you a reindeer to your personality. So once I iterated upon the questions and answers and the scoring system, I then generated scoring system.ts. Moving on to my project overview. So this is where I told Claude to generate a project overview based off of what we've discussed with the results and scoring system. And I gave Claude one of my old project overviews as a template, and then we generated the project overview markdown file over here. I'll put a link in the description or up here to a video I did on what a project overview is and why I recommend it. But that concludes step 2 of the quiz creation with Claude AI. So on to step number 3, development. So the first thing I did in Cursor was I created a blank project. Then I opened up Composer Agent. So just a quick explanation of these two features of Cursor. Just zoom in here. So in Cursor, we have two main modes. We have the chat mode and the composer mode. If you go over to composer mode, you can see down here on the right, we have normal mode and the agent mode. The agent mode was a feature that was released a few weeks ago around the time of Thanksgiving. Before the agent mode, you just had Composer normal and chat. From what I've experienced, Composer is good to start off your project, to get the initial file set up, the initial project structure set up, and chat is good for iterating upon smaller features during development. What I found is Composer actually does a good job of iterating upon smaller features as well. So in this project, I actually used Composer normal for probably 90-95% of development. Composer normal is also kind of a lazier way to develop, as it'll suggest the code changes and all you have to do is click one button, click apply, and it'll make all the changes for you. So naturally, during this mode, it's easy to miss kind of some changes that Cursor made for you and end up in a bad state. In chat mode, there are 2 steps to implementing Cursor's changes. The first is to approve of the change, and then you have to accept the change. So you can have greater control in seeing what changes are going to be made, but it is an extra step as opposed to just Composer where you click one button and all the changes are made for you. Now, if you go to Composer and you go into agent mode, think of agent mode as just having one more step of autonomy over Composer normal mode. So sometimes Composer normal will ask you, can you provide these files to me? For example, if you have a super long chat with Composer normal and it's starting to get less effective, Composer normal will say, hey, can you actually provide this file to me? Tell me what changes are in the file so I can continue. Whereas Composer agent will just look for the files and find the relevant files that are needed. However, the biggest thing with Composer Agent that I've experienced, the biggest frustration, is that it hangs. It kind of just freezes sometimes with generating files and you're stuck. And it's very, very frustrating while you're developing. So that is why I use Composer Normal for about 90-95% of development in this project. Back to our diagram over here. So I started with Composer Agent, but because of the bugginess of it, I went over to Composer Normal for the rest of the development. So moving on to my initial prompt over here, I told Cursor that I want to create a quiz that will tell you which of Santa's AI reindeer you are. I included my project overview, my quiz content TS, and my scoring system TS. Remember, these were all files that I generated using the help of Claude. Then I also attached a screenshot of our mockup from Lovable. Then I said, please design our app as close to the attached screenshot. And then after this, Cursor went ahead and built the file structure, utilized the files that I provided it, and we were all set up and ready to go. All right, so moving on to the GitHub setup. Now, GitHub and using Git to commit and push your code to GitHub can be its entirely own video, which can be like an hour long. And if you're interested in that kind of video, in me breaking down what it is for beginners and those who've never used GitHub before, let me know in the comments down below. So in very simple terms, GitHub is a place where you can store your code in the cloud. You might hear the terms commit or pushing your code to GitHub. Those are pretty much terms to say you are uploading your code into GitHub. There are a bunch of reasons why you should be pushing your code into GitHub. One being you don't want all your code locally on your computer and something happens to your computer and you don't have a backup. So pushing your code to GitHub, one, acts as a backup, and number 2, it acts as a point or a source of truth for your code. So let's say you're developing a feature, you push your code into GitHub, it is now in the cloud. Then you start iterating on that feature. Let's say Cursor messes up, deletes some code, and now your feature is broken. What are you going to do now? If you didn't push your code into GitHub, you're going to have a hard time reverting all the changes, and you might just be in a broken state permanently. But because your code is in GitHub, it is a point of truth for that feature. You can just revert your changes, and then your IDE will pull the changes from GitHub and restore your code to the working state. Now, if that didn't make any sense to you, let me just give you an example really quick. Hop over to Cursor. Over here, I have the title of the first page, which of Santa's AI reindeer are you? Now, if you look over here in source control, I don't have any changes with my local environment and with what GitHub has. But if I say, instead of which of Santa's reindeer are you, which of Santa's AI reindeer are you this holiday season, and save, you're going to see source control recognize that there's a difference in what our code has locally and what is in GitHub. So if you click on this, it actually pulls up a diff showing you what exactly was the change. So on the left here is what we have in GitHub, and on the right here is what we just changed. So if this is a change you really want to make, then you simply just write a commit message here saying update title of app, and then you can click commit and push, and then it will commit and push these code changes into GitHub. Now, what's the difference between committing and pushing? Don't want to get too much into Git and GitHub. Again, I can do an entire video on that, but hopefully that example just gave you an idea of why you should always be committing your code or pushing your code into GitHub. So you can see I have a nice little circle for GitHub project here. So moving on, after the GitHub setup, this is where we did our main development. Again, this is where we were iterating on the quiz questions and answers, checking out the scoring and results if they align with the reindeer that we want to give you after your answers have all been chosen. This is where we iterated on the UX and the UI design and created unit tests as well. Before we get into unit tests, adding a cursor rules file is always a good idea. Cursor rules file is pretty much a file that cursor will reference in order to code and give you suggestions in a certain way. So I'll show you real quick my cursor rules file over here. In my cursor rules file, I have you are a UX UI expert with experience in holiday, winter, Christmas, Santa themed quizzes. Always keep things bright, festive, and colorful. And then I referenced a Santa tracker Google for just some of our color inspiration. This is a good idea to include your project overview in the cursor rules file as well. There are also cursor rules templates. I forgot the website, but I can link it down below, where if you're building a Next.js app or if you're building a certain kind of app, there are free templates where you can grab those cursor rules and implement it in your own. So cursor rules file, great idea to have. Everyone should use it when using cursor. Now, one more pro tip that I have for you today are unit tests. So think of unit tests as a way to test the functionality of your code programmatically. So for example, if I'm over here in the reindeer quiz and I want to test if, say, Dasher gets chosen all the time, I have to go and I have to click on 7 answers and then go all the way to the end and see if I get Dasher, which I got Rudolph. So imagine having to do that a bunch of times during development. It's kind of tedious, right? You can use unit tests to programmatically test which answer paths lead to each reindeer. So instead of having to click through the quiz a bunch of times, you can write a test saying these answers lead to Rudolph, these answers lead to Dasher, these answers lead to Blitzen, so on and so forth. So just a quick glance at my unit test, you can see, for example, these answers will lead to Dasher, these answers will lead to Dancer, these answers will lead to Prancer, so on and so forth. And to run those unit tests, you just go to your command line, do npm run test, and you can run the suite or you can run the group of tests. And you can see over here, Dasher should identify as speed focused, Dancer should identify as social focused. I have some tests for balancing 2 traits, and we have some edge case tests over here. So every time that you make some feature changes, you can go ahead and just run the unit tests and make sure that our quiz is functioning as it's expected to. And you can already see how powerful unit tests can be. So again, I can do another video on unit tests. Super powerful, super useful. Do unit tests to help ensure you have a high code quality. Back to our diagram. So once the application was in a good state in which I was happy with how things are working, and I was happy with how the UI design was, I then got into production testing, which, if you have a GitHub project, it's really easy to deploy for free on Vercel. So I did that, and then I started testing the quiz on the desktop, and then I did more testing with the quiz on my phone. As this is a mobile web app, I did want to test on mobile as well. So after doing production testing, then we moved on to UI refinement. This is where I fixed some non-critical issues with the UI, and this is where I fixed issues that I noticed would only happen in iOS. I had a pesky issue where the answers were blending with the previous question's answers and they weren't rendering correctly, and it would only happen on iOS. But thankfully I was able to iterate and debug that with the help of Cursor, and we got past that issue. So this is the UI refinement phase. This is coupled with more production testing. There was some mobile responsiveness testing issues as well. For mobile responsive testing, yes, you should test on your phone, but you can also just pull up the developer tools. You can right click on your web app, inspect, and then at the top over here, you can set it to different dimensions, whether it's iPhone SE, but you can also click on the responsive option and then just drag this over here. So this is full screen as if you're on a desktop. And then if you shrink the screen, it'll test the responsiveness. So everything kind of maintains its responsiveness as the dimensions shrink. So that's one way to test your responsiveness without deploying and having to check the changes on your iPhone or Android. Another way to test the responsiveness is just shrink the screen down vertically like that. I skipped over this over here. So within the whole development phase, we're always pushing our code to GitHub. So after doing a small feature, after doing a bug fix, always push the changes to GitHub. It's also a good idea to start a fresh cursor, chat, or composer session after each feature, just so the chat sessions don't get super long. The longer they get, the less effective that cursor can be. In a nutshell, commit and push your features and bug fixes often, and then start fresh composer or chat sessions to keep things fresh and not letting cursor get bogged down with so much context. So after this round of UI refinement and additional production testing, I was pretty much done with the application. I was happy with how the UI and the UX looked, and I was happy how we can have clear paths to each reindeer result. But I wanted to make this app just a little bit better. Since this is Santa's AI reindeer app, I just had to generate some AI images of reindeer. So to do that, I used Midjourney. And this was my first time using Midjourney. I actually signed up for this subscription, and it took a while for me to generate these images because you have to do a lot of iteration on the images and wait for the images to be generated. But finally, I was able to create 9 unique different reindeer, all in the same style. And once I generated all of the reindeer photos, I went into Cursor, and then I said to Cursor, can you please implement a reindeer profile feature in the results page? And now the results page will show a photo of the reindeer, as you already saw, that you are assigned or that your personality matches the best, which I think is a pretty cool feature. And because you're watching this video, I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what all the reindeer look like. This is Dasher, Prancer, Blitzen, Cupid, Rudolph, Vixen, Comet, and Donner. And I really gave some thought into making each of these reindeer photos match their true personality. So there's a little personal touch over there for you. And then after I did that, then I was finally finished with the application. For real this time. Or maybe not really. I'm actually thinking about getting a custom domain for this quiz just to make it a little more official and to make it a little more fun. Not sure yet, but if I do, I'll leave a link to the updated quiz in the description below. So that was my process of creating the Santa's AI reindeer quiz from scratch. We went from our mock-up to our quiz creation to development to our nice to have. Lastly, I wanted to share some quick tips and notes with you all from this experience. Some of these I mentioned before, but it's good to just remind you of these just so you can use these tips, learn from what I did in this video, and go on to make your own apps with this knowledge. So first, it's always a good idea to do a lot of prep before your first prompt. Have a mockup, have a project overview. Composer agent still hangs and it's not dependable. I really hope that Cursor fixes it because it's just not there yet. And again, I used Composer normal for this project. In the next point, the longer chat sessions that we have, Cursor becomes less effective. So remember, after each feature or bug fix, it is a good idea to start a new chat session. I mentioned this before, but commit and push to GitHub often. Write clear commit messages. Future you will thank you. You don't have to be super detailed, but give a good idea in your commit messages, a good concise idea of what was accomplished with this commit. Future you will thank you because your commit history can actually give you a good summary of how the project was developed. This is my commit history of the project. And just by looking at it, it kind of tells a story. So you can see I pushed the initial files, updated the scoring system, added some unit tests, again, updated scoring. Then I was doing some CSS. Here's when I first tested production. Then I added some more CSS, updated title, and you can see change quiz title again, more CSS changes. Over here, I was fixing issues and then adding the profile photo functionality at the end. So as you can see, my Git commit history tells a good story about how I developed this project. And I can also go back and see where I made specific changes for features. So it is a good idea to write clear commit messages. Future you will thank you. I mentioned already, start fresh chat sessions after each feature bug fix. Again, unit tests are very helpful and a very powerful way to programmatically test the functionality of your application. These tips will apply whether you're using Cursor or Lovable or Bolt or Claude. It's always a good idea to give context. In Cursor rules, you can have the context about your project, or you can manually give context in the chat box. So with the context in the Cursor rules file, you can say, hey, remember in our cursor rules file, we have these colors that we want to adhere to. Please adhere to the theme that we have going on. Or be like, hey, remember in cursor rules, you're a UI expert. Don't forget about that. If cursor is still messing up, this is a great tip over here. Tell cursor to analyze step by step why we haven't been able to solve this issue yet. Because if you tell cursor to fix it and doesn't fix it, you can say, hold on, chill out, don't give me any code. Propose a few solutions first before we move forward. And I found that this is really, really powerful. And in doing this, usually it'll provide you with 3 approaches, and then it'll choose the best approach to move forward, which then you can accept and say, okay, cool. Well, now give me the code. You can also tell cursor to ask you questions to help debug things. And then finally, using the first principles approach, which is determining what do we know to be fundamentally true at this point in time and working from there. Whew. So everybody, I hope in today's video you learned a few things. I hope it was valuable to you. We took a step inside of my mind into my process of how I created Santa's AI reindeer quiz. I shared some tips on why we should be using GitHub, on why unit tests are helpful, and some tips on how to use cursor effectively. If you had any questions about anything we talked about today, feel free to leave a comment below. I can always expand on any of the topics we covered today in a future video. I had a lot of fun creating this quiz, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Feel free to share it with your friends, with your AI builder communities. Happy coding, happy holidays. This is the 12 Days of Codemas, day number 4. I will see you tomorrow.